In 1997, an 8-year-old boy vanished from his family's farmhouse in northern Minnesota. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no broken glass. The only part of the house investigators couldn't access was the furnace room, sealed by water damage declared irrelevant. But the furnace, it kept running, even when the rest of the house lost power, almost like it had learned to breathe. Now, nearly 30 years later, his sister has come home, and behind that same wall, something just knocked back. Before we begin, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Emily Kessler. I'm 43 years old, born and raised in Wabeno County, Minnesota. I live in the city now, work in accounting. It's a quiet life. I thought I'd left all of that behind. I hadn't heard my mother's voice in almost 6 years, not since the last call we had, the one that ended with more silence than words. But that morning, a letter came. No return address, no date stamp, just my name written in the handwriting I hadn't seen since high school. Inside was one sheet of lined paper, folded once, 7 words, no punctuation, no explanation. He's still there behind the furnace. M. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The room was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator, the faint whine of a siren blocks away. My coffee had gone cold. I should have thrown the letter away, called someone, ignored it, but I didn't. I got up, walked down the hall, and pulled an old cardboard box from the back of the closet. I hadn't opened it in 20 years. Inside were newspaper clippings, photocopied flyers, school portraits. Jacob Kessler, age 8, missing since June 2nd, 1997. He was my little brother. The story they told was that he wandered off, that kids do that sometimes, that maybe he fell into the creek or got turned around in the woods. But I never believed it. Not even then. Because I remembered that basement. I remembered what it sounded like down there. Not the pipes, not the wind. Something else. Like breath, like whispering. I never told anyone, not the police, not my therapist, not even Mom. Until that letter. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. It rang twice, then clicked. Emily. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "You got one too, didn't you?" She was quiet for a second, then said, "Yes." "This morning. Did you call anyone?" "No." "Why not?" A long pause. "Because I think it's time." I looked down at the letter still on the table. My fingers had curled tight around the edges. I said, "I'm coming home." The drive up took 4.5 hours. Every highway marker brought something back. The lake with the crooked dock, the farm stand that used to sell sweet corn in summer, the stretch of pines where Jacob and I used to count fence posts like stars. It didn't feel like a road trip. It felt like going backwards. By the time I turned onto our gravel drive, I was 11 again. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Grayer. The paint had peeled off the shutters and the mailbox leaned sideways like it was giving up. The front windows were dark, no curtains, no lights, just blank panes. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment listening to the stillness. The kind of stillness that presses in behind your eyes. Then the front door opened. My mother stood there, wrapped in an old cardigan. Her hair had gone silver. Her eyes were dull. "Come in," she said. I kept the heat running. The inside of the house hadn't changed. Same braided rug, same broken clock on the wall, same faint scent of cedar and something else, something metallic, not unpleasant, just strange. Jacob's photo was still in the hallway, the same toothless grin, the same red flannel shirt. "He would have turned 34 this year," she said softly. I nodded. Couldn't speak. In the kitchen, she made tea like nothing had happened. No questions, no apologies, just silence. I reached into my coat and slid the letter onto the table. She didn't flinch. "I burned mine," she said, "but I memorized it. Do you think it's real?" She stared at the steam curling from her mug. "The police said the room was inaccessible, that he probably wandered off." I clenched my jaw. "But he didn't." "No," she whispered. "He didn't. He was afraid of that basement. Remember, I did. He cried if the door was left open. Said there was something behind the furnace. Something whispering. Something watching. We all said he was just imaginative. But I heard it once, too. Only once. And I've never forgotten it." Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I stood at the top of the basement stairs. The air coming up felt wrong. Not cold, empty. I flipped the switch. A single bulb flickered to life. The furnace room door was still there. Still chained. Still warped from that flood all those years ago. But on the wood just above the handle was a mark. A fingerprint. Small. Fresh. I stayed up most of that night. Not because I couldn't sleep. I just didn't want to. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in layers. You don't hear it all at once. It creeps up on you. The longer you sit still, the more you notice what's not there. No wind against the siding, no plumbing ticking through the walls, just the low, steady hum of the furnace under the floorboards. By morning, the snow had started, light, fine powder falling slow enough to watch. I stood at the front window with a mug of coffee that I never drank. The glass was cold against my hand. My mother was still upstairs. I don't know if she was asleep or just staying out of the way. At 9:13 a.m., someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The house sits a half-mile off the road down a gravel lane that doesn't get plowed unless someone calls the county. This time of year, no one just shows up. I opened the door slowly. A man stood there, late 60s, maybe in a tan parka and a wool cap with the Twins logo stitched on the front. He had a worn leather satchel over one shoulder and heavy gloves in his hands. "Emily Kessler?" he asked. I nodded. "Didn't think you'd remember me," he said, and then gave a half smile. "I'm Walt Henderson. I live up on Ridge Lane. Your dad and I played ball together in high school. I didn't place the name at first, but then it clicked. He used to bring us tomatoes from his garden. He'd plow the drive with his truck before the township put a route through here." "I remember you," I said. "You used to call Jacob spaghetti legs." Walt chuckled once. "Yeah." He hated that. He glanced at the snow starting to settle on the porch. "Saw your car in the drive last night. Figured you came back for a reason." I hesitated, then stepped back. "You want some coffee?" We sat at the same table where Jacob used to stack sugar cubes when he was bored. I slid the letter across the wood. Walt didn't touch it, just read the words, then leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "I'll be straight with you," he said. "You and your brother were good kids, but I always thought there was something off about that basement." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "You ever hear a house breathe?" he asked. I didn't answer. "I know how it sounds," he said. "But I used to help your dad check the furnace every fall. Just routine stuff. Filter cleanouts, pressure checks. But that room, even when we cut the heat, it was always warm. Too warm. And when you stood near the back wall, the one behind the furnace, it felt hollow, like something was behind it." My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. "I mentioned it once to your dad," Walt went on. "He just laughed, said the house had secrets." I didn't say anything. And then Jacob disappeared. He watched me. I didn't look away. "I never believed he ran off," he said. "Not in bare feet, not with snow in the air." "The furnace room's still sealed," I said quietly. "You should have someone look at that wall." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, laid it flat on the table. It was a short article. June 5th, 1997. Local boy still missing. I'd seen that one before. But someone had circled a line halfway down in red ink. A name I didn't recognize. Michael Holbrook, age 56. Maintenance contractor. Previously employed by the Kessler family. Reported missing 2 days after Jacob. I don't remember this, I said. Most people don't, Walt said. But 2 people went missing that week, not 1. After he left, I stayed at the table, read the name again. Then again. Michael Holbrook. It meant nothing to me. No face, no memory. But I had the family photo boxes upstairs. The snow picked up as the afternoon dragged on. I sat in the dining room, photos and receipts and clippings spread out like puzzle pieces. Nothing in them showed anything useful. Until one photo slipped out from the back of a manila envelope. It was a picture of my dad standing out by the barn with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, mid-50s, tool belt on, holding a thermos. On the back in my mother's handwriting. Fall Maintenance Day. Jack. Me and M.H. I took the photo upstairs. My mother was sitting at the edge of her bed quilt wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" I asked. She looked at the photo, then at me. "We never knew for sure he was missing," she said. "He was a quiet man, came twice a year, furnace and water checks. One day he just didn't come back. You wrote his initials," I said. "You remembered him." Her voice was low. "Because I didn't want to remember what he said the last time I saw him." I waited. "It was 3 days before Jacob vanished," she said. "Michael came early. Said something felt off in the furnace room. Not the equipment, something else. Atmospheric. He said the wall felt like it was breathing." That word again. "Your father brushed it off," she said. "Said Michael was just being dramatic. But Michael came back that night, unannounced. Said he needed to look again. Jack told him no. Said it could wait until fall." Her hands were still. "And then Jacob." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "I didn't sleep. I spent the night walking the halls, checking drawers, tapping behind cabinets, searching for anything that connected the pieces. In my father's old desk, I found a folder labeled Property, Kessler Farm, mostly utility bills, insurance. But near the back was a folded sheet with hand-drawn lines, a layout of the basement, dated 1973. One section stood out just behind the furnace room wall. A red box, labeled Storage Tunnel, sealed. I stared at it for a long time. Then I went down to the basement, brought a flashlight, gloves, a hammer. The hinges were rusted but not broken. I pried the door open 1 inch at a time. The furnace loomed just ahead, cold now, silent. Behind it, in the far corner, I saw something, a patch of wall that didn't match the rest. Uneven, rougher, almost like it had been added later. I stepped closer. Etched into the dust, faint but real initials scratched into the stone. J.K. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the old diagram on my lap. Tea gone cold in my hand. I kept thinking about what Michael said. The furnace room didn't need heat to be warm, and the wall didn't just remember. It was waiting. The morning after I found the initials, I called the county records office. I asked if anyone had ever reopened the case after the initial search, any follow-ups, missing persons matches, anything added to Jacob's file. The woman on the other end told me no. The file had been dormant since the early 2000s. Nothing further logged, no leads, no reopened investigations. I didn't tell her what I found behind the furnace. I just thanked her and hung up. I had the newspaper clippings still sitting on the table, the name circled in red: Michael Holbrook, maintenance contractor, last seen 2 days after Jacob vanished. I went back online, dug through archive scans, local obituaries, missing persons databases. Nothing. Just the one article. like someone had hit delete and the rest had been wiped. My mother stayed quiet that day. She didn't ask what I was doing, and I didn't offer it. She moved through the house slowly, keeping to the kitchen and the upstairs hallway. Every time I passed her, she seemed smaller. Around 3 in the afternoon, I got in the car and drove into town. The library was still there, though the parking lot was mostly snowed over. Inside, it smelled the same old paper floor wax and something faintly lemony from the janitor's closet down the hall. I spoke to the woman at the desk, Helen Orville. She remembered my family, said she'd pulled a few property files once before for someone writing a local history piece. I told her I was looking for anything tied to the land before the house was built. She didn't ask why, just nodded and walked me to the back. She had a few folders waiting. The Kessler place wasn't always a farmhouse, she said. Before the 1940s, the land belonged to a man named Elias Granger. He ran a kind of youth home. Nothing official, more like a work farm. I flipped through the papers, sparse records, handwritten entries. Most of the files were dated before 1926. That year there was a fire, Helen said. A structural collapse. Reports say part of the root cellar caved in. The building was condemned. They sold the land a decade later. I pointed to a line near the bottom of one report. This says the collapse was underground. Right. Root cellar and something beyond it. No plans were drawn up for that part. Some kind of tunnel, maybe. But the new house your family's was built over the same foundation. When I got back home, I pulled out the 2 diagrams. My father's basement sketch from 1973 and the Granger records Helen had copied for me. I laid them side by side on the dining room table. The layout matched. The storage tunnel sealed in red ink on my dad's sketch lined up with the old records from the Granger property. The same location, same length, same direction. Whatever was behind the furnace wall hadn't started with us. I went back downstairs. This time I brought the flashlight and gloves again. The air was warmer than before. Not like a heated room, more like walking into a greenhouse that had been closed up for days. It clung to my skin. I crouched beside the furnace, ran my hand along the mortar lines in the brickwork. When I reached the far edge, I felt something give, just slightly, like the wall wasn't completely solid. And then I heard it. Movement. Not a voice, not footsteps, just a shift. A sound like fabric brushing stone. I stood, slowly. There was no one behind me. The stairwell was empty. But when I got to the top and stepped into the hallway, the front door was still locked. My mother was still asleep. And on the porch railing, resting where I hadn't left anything, was a single brass button. It looked old, ornate. I picked it up, turned it over. Etched faintly into the back were 2 letters. M.H. I didn't sleep. That night I went up to the attic. I hadn't been up there in over 20 years. The pull-down ladder groaned when I climbed it. The flashlight beam cut through dust that moved like slow fog in the cold. The air smelled the same wood insulation and that dry, brittle scent of something long closed off. I moved past boxes, old toys, stacks of magazines, toward the far corner where an antique trunk sat beneath a sloped beam. It wasn't labeled. The lock had rusted through. Inside were folded linens, cracked books, and at the very bottom a leather-bound journal. No name on the cover. The first entry was dated March 12, 1996. Kessler property. Initial inspection. The handwriting was neat. Mail. Basement utility room wall shows signs of expansion. Not from moisture. Internal pressure. Heat readings inconsistent. Further in back wall sounds hollow on certain days. Only when quiet. And then May 30th, 1997. The boy asked me if the wall was alive. I stopped. He said it whispered to him, told him stories. I told him it was the furnace. I shouldn't have lied. The last entry, June 1st, 1997. I'm going back tonight. After hours. They need to know. If I don't return, let the wall sleep. Let it forget. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. It was him. Michael Holbrook. Back downstairs, I asked my mother where he stayed when he visited. She didn't answer right away, just looked past me. We used to have a guest room in the west hallway, she said, before the remodel. The door stuck a little when I opened it. The room smelled like dust and dried wood. The mattress was gone. The walls had faded, but the bookshelf was still there. Only one object sat on it. A carved wooden figurine. A boy holding a lantern. Jacob's. He'd lost it the week before he disappeared. Told me it had been taken. I picked it up, turned it over. Scratched into the base in faint block letters were 2 words. Still here. That night I dreamed of the furnace, not just the hum, but something behind it. Something with breath and memory. I heard Jacob's voice. It doesn't want to be forgotten. I didn't leave the house for the next 2 days. I didn't answer calls. I didn't check email. The only time I stepped outside was to grab firewood from the porch. Every window looked different now. Every creak in the floor had a rhythm I hadn't noticed before. The house didn't feel haunted. It felt alert. I went through the journal again. Holbrook's. I read the entries out loud this time just to hear them said. Words like breathing wall, and the boy asked if it was alive sounded different in my voice than in my head. I found myself reading the final entry over and over. June 1st, 1997. I'm going back tonight. After hours. They need to know. If I don't return, let the wall sleep. Let it forget. But it didn't forget. It was early evening when I noticed it. The figurine on my nightstand. The wooden boy with the lantern. When I picked it up the first time, it had faced the window. Now it faced the door. I hadn't touched it. My mother hadn't come into my room. I turned it back toward the window and went downstairs. The furnace was running. Not loud, just steady, like it always had. But standing above it now, it didn't feel like a machine. It felt like breath, long and low, like something remembering how to breathe through old metal. I spent that night in the kitchen. I couldn't bring myself to go back up. The next morning, I unpacked the crawl space under the stairs. My father used to store tools there. Most of it was still untouched paint cans, half-full boxes of nails, a tin marked electrical. I pushed everything aside and laid the old blueprint on the floor next to the one from Helen. Same outline, same location for the tunnel. But there was one more thing. Near the bottom of my father's hand-drawn sketch was a line in pencil I hadn't noticed before. Faint, easy to miss. Tunnel access patched 1981. Use reinforced mortar. That was 16 years before Jacob disappeared. I went back to the furnace room with a crowbar and a small rubber mallet. I didn't break anything, not yet. I tapped gently along the back wall. The sound changed halfway across, from stone to something deeper, like striking the side of an old drum. That evening I called Walt, told him I found something that might matter. I didn't give details over the phone, just asked if he could come by the next day with a thermal scanner if he had one. He said he'd find something and be there by morning. That night I sat in the living room again with the journal. I didn't open it. I just held it. Around 2 a.m., the power flickered once. I waited. 10 seconds later, it cut entirely. No lights, no hum, no sound. I walked to the window. The houses across the valley still had porch lights on. The power outage was just us. I went to check the basement door. Still locked, but standing at the top of the stairs, I heard it. A low knock. Not loud. Just once. Not a pipe. Not shifting wood. I didn't open the door. I went back upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed and waited for the daylight. By morning, the power was still out. The temperature in the house had started to drop. My mother was in the kitchen, staring out the window like she had forgotten how to blink. "I think the house knows I'm here," I said. She didn't answer. I waited. Then I asked, "Have you heard it too?" She nodded slowly. "Since the letter came, you didn't tell me, because part of me thought it might be Jacob." I didn't ask what she meant. I went back upstairs. The figurine had turned again. Now it faced the bed. That afternoon I called the Historical Society, asked for anything else they could find tied to the Granger property, the one that came before ours. The woman I spoke to said she'd look through the archived permits, see if any of the workers had names on record. I gave her mine. She promised to call if anything came up. I made tea that evening, and when I reached into the drawer for a spoon, I found something else. A button. The same brass one I'd found on the porch, now inside the house, resting near the measuring spoons. I didn't tell my mother. I put it in my coat pocket and went out to the woodshed. Stood there in the snow until I couldn't feel my hands. There's something that happens when you've kept a secret too long. Your memory changes shape. Not erased, just softened around the edges, but I could still remember the last week before Jacob disappeared. He stopped sleeping in his room, said it was too quiet, started leaving his door open just a crack, said he liked to hear the furnace, said it hummed to him. One night he sat on the floor beside the heat vent and whispered something into it. I asked what he was doing. He said the wall listens. Then he told me something I haven't said out loud since. He said it wanted to remember things, and the way he said it didn't sound like a game. It sounded like a promise. That night, I slept on the couch with the hallway light on. I dreamed I was back in the tunnel behind the furnace, only this time it was longer. The end never came, just more dark. And somewhere inside it, I heard Jacob. Not screaming, not calling out, just whispering, over and over, like he was telling the wall a story. Walt showed up the next morning just after 9. He had a thermographic scanner, 2 lanterns, and what looked like a mason's hammer in a canvas bag. He also brought salt in a Ziploc, said it half joking but didn't smile when he said it. We didn't talk much on the way down. The basement was colder than it had been the night before, but the furnace room, when I opened the latch and pushed the door in, felt warm again. Thick, stale air like something sealed tight had been slowly releasing heat from behind the wall. Walt held up the thermal scanner, moved it along the brick, his brow furrowed. "It's hotter here," he said. "By a lot. Like something's giving off heat from the other side." "Not the furnace I asked." He shook his head. "No, this isn't mechanical heat. It's too steady, too deep. Feels residual." We worked quietly. I held the lantern up while he tested the mortar with his hammer, tapped along the seams until one section cracked slightly under pressure. A line formed. Thin. Dust sifted out from the gap, and with it came a breath of air that hit my face like someone exhaling from inside a closed space. Walt stepped back. "That's not normal." The light flickered in my hand. I steadied it. Then footsteps. Upstairs. One. Then another. Slow. Even. Walt looked at me. "Is your mother home?" I shook my head. "She left to pick up groceries an hour ago." We listened. Nothing else followed. No creak of the door. No retreating steps. Just silence. Walt picked the crowbar back up. "Do we stop?" I looked at the crack in the wall at the heat leaking through. "No," I said. "We open it." We worked for most of the day, breaking only for water. We took turns, Walt prying bricks loose one by one, me brushing away dust and mortar as it fell. Every few layers, we'd pause. Each time the air got warmer. Around 4 p.m., he dislodged a small brick near the base. Behind it was black, not just shadow, black that didn't reflect any light. I knelt down, held the lantern close, and reached inside. My fingers brushed something cold. I pulled out a rusted metal object. A key. Not modern, long, old-fashioned. A ribbon had once been tied to it, but now it was little more than a thread. "There's something else," Walt said. He reached in carefully, then pulled out a wooden box no larger than a sandwich. The lid was cracked. Inside was a cloth wrap, waxed paper yellowed with age. He opened it slowly. Inside were teeth, small, worn, children's. I turned away, not from shock, but from something else. Recognition. Jacob had lost a tooth the week before he disappeared. He hid it under his bed. Said he didn't want the tooth fairy to take it. Said he wanted to keep it. Walt closed the box and set it aside. Neither of us said anything. We kept working until the hole was large enough to see through. The tunnel beyond was rough hand-carved stone and packed dirt barely wide enough to crawl through. The floor sloped downward maybe 3 feet. The ceiling was so low I'd have to go in on hands and knees. I held the lantern up to the edge of the opening and saw a faint shape scratched into the inner wall, almost invisible without direct light. Walt moved beside me and looked closer. There, just beneath the keyhole-shaped stone, was a message. "Don't open it unless you're ready to leave something behind." And beneath it, JH 1997. Walt stepped back. "That's not Jacob Kessler." "No," I said. "It's Jacob Holbrook." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor in my old bedroom, the figurine beside me again, still facing the door. I read the journal again, read the names, the dates. The boy asked me if the wall was alive. It wants to remember. A rhythm like someone waiting. I thought about what Jacob told me all those years ago, that it whispered to him, that it hummed when it was dark. I remembered the way he used to speak to the heat vent like it was listening. I thought of the teeth, the key, the initials. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was remembering him. I felt like the house was. The next morning, I went into the basement alone. I didn't take tools, just a lantern and the journal. The furnace room was warmer than ever. Still. Quiet. I crouched at the edge of the tunnel, looked inside. It didn't go far in distance, but the air inside it didn't feel like it belonged underground. It felt like breath trapped between pages. I didn't crawl inside. Not yet. But I reached forward and touched the wall beside the entrance. It was smooth in some places. In others, clawed, scratched. The kind of marks made by someone trying to get out. One set of initials was deeper than the rest, carved low, just at the edge of reach. J.K. Jacob Kessler. I stood, walked back upstairs. My mother was sitting in the kitchen, knitting something that wasn't growing. "Do you remember what Michael Holbrook said before he vanished?" I asked. She didn't look up. "He said the wall didn't just hold heat. It held memory." I nodded. "He said it doesn't forget." She paused her hands. "No. He said it remembers everything you give it, especially if you give it without meaning to." I sat down across from her. "I think it remembers both Jacobs," I said. She didn't speak. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the wind had picked up. The siding groaned. Somewhere under the floor, I heard the furnace hum again. But this time it wasn't steady. It was pulsing, like it was waiting. Walt came back the next morning. He brought a headlamp, 2 lanterns, a fresh thermos of coffee, and a crowbar wrapped in electrical tape. When I asked what the tape was for, he said it made the grip easier, then added, "And maybe it keeps whatever's back there from recognizing it." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't have the energy to. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, but the furnace room, once we opened the door, felt like something had exhaled into it. The warmth was thicker than before, not comforting, not right, like heat from a space that didn't want to let go of it. We stood in front of the exposed bricks, the section we'd already broken through. Walt scanned the wall with his light again. "This is newer than the rest," he said. "Different mortar, poured in a hurry, not finished work." I reached for the edge of one of the bricks. "These don't look like they were sealed by someone trying to keep water out." He nodded. "They were trying to keep something in." He got down low and began pulling loose the remaining bricks. One by one, the wall gave way. No collapse, no groan, just a quiet release. The final brick fell forward with a soft thud, and behind it the tunnel opened fully for the first time. The light didn't reach far. Just a few feet in the walls curved slightly and disappeared into dark. The air coming from the opening wasn't cold or damp, it was warm, dry still, like a space that had been untouched for a very long time. Walt crouched beside the opening and held up his headlamp. "Tunnel's short. Looks like it bends left." "You sure about this?" I didn't answer right away. I looked back toward the stairwell, half expecting to hear something, but the rest of the house was silent. I stepped forward and ducked into the tunnel. The ceiling was low enough that I had to crawl. The packed earth scratched at my elbows. The lantern shook in my hand as I moved. It wasn't a long tunnel, maybe 12-15 feet, but the sense of space changed as I went. The air got warmer, denser. Each breath felt like I was breathing in something with weight. I turned the corner and found the chamber. It was a hollow barely taller than a crawl space. The walls were rough stone and carved earth like someone had dug it by hand long ago. There was no furniture, no signs of collapse, just names, etched into the walls, dozens of them. Some were clear carved with purpose. Others looked rushed, half-finished, or scratched with something sharper than a nail. Some I recognized, some I didn't. E. Wright, Clara M. Jonas T. And then, near the far wall, M.H., J.H., 1997, Michael Hulbrook, Jacob Hulbrook. I moved slowly, running my fingers along the letters. The stone was smooth in places, but there were grooves where fingernails had scraped. And then I saw the shelf. It was no more than a plank of wood laid into a carved notch in the wall, faded, uneven. On it sat a line of small objects, a red mitten, a cracked pair of children's glasses, a marble, a doll's head, each one labeled. Carved into the shelf beneath them were initials, memory tokens. I stepped closer and found something tucked into the far corner behind an old music box. A photograph. It was of a girl standing in a field behind the Kessler house. Age 11, maybe 12. Wind blowing her hair sideways, her arms crossed awkwardly in front of her. It was me. The photo was old, but I recognized the shirt, the scar on my chin. Someone had placed it here. Someone or something. And then I heard it. Not a sound in the room, not a voice in my ear, but a thought, a presence. "Will you trade?" It wasn't a question spoken aloud. It pressed into my chest like a held breath. Trade what I whispered. I already knew. The wall didn't take. It remembered. And the way it remembered was by keeping something in return. A name, a face, a piece of someone. And then I heard his voice. Jacob. Not the boy from the newsprint photo. Older, tired, familiar in a way that didn't make sense. "Please, I don't want to be forgotten." I dropped the photograph. My hand was shaking. "You may bring him back, but something must take his place." I backed toward the tunnel. The air was heavier now, not with dust, something else. Like the heat carried memory with it, like every breath I took was filled with pieces of other people. I crawled out, gasping. My knees scraped, my fingers raw from the stone. I sat on the furnace room floor and tried to steady my hands. The tunnel behind me looked the same as before, but it felt different now, like it had shown me what it wanted to, and now it was waiting. I didn't tell Walt everything, not right away. I told him the tunnel opened into a chamber, that there were names, that some of them matched. He didn't press. Later that night, I sat in the living room with the journal in my lap. Let the wall sleep, let it forget. But it wasn't sleeping, and forgetting was never the point. I lit a candle. The power was still out. My mother stood near the window wrapped in her shawl. I told her what I saw. The photo, the shelf, the names. She listened, said nothing for a long time, then quietly said, "If you're going to open it again, do it before the full moon." I turned to her. "Why?" She looked at me with eyes that were too still. "Because that's when it's strongest. Whatever it is, that's when it remembers the most." That night I didn't dream in the usual way. I saw Jacob again, standing in the furnace room, barefoot, dust on his cheeks. He didn't speak, but I heard him. "You stopped looking." I woke to silence. The clock on the wall wasn't ticking. The thermostat was blank. I walked to the hallway. The door to the basement was closed, but the house didn't feel still. It felt paused, waiting. I waited until morning before going back down. The tunnel hadn't changed, but it felt heavier somehow, like it knew what I was bringing. I carried the letter I'd written the night before, folded it once, sealed it with a thumbprint. No envelope, just paper and a name. Jacob. The furnace room was silent, not off, just listening. I crouched beside the entrance and slid the letter into the space behind the first step in the tunnel. The hum stopped, not faded, stopped, then a shuffle, something faint like cloth brushing over packed dirt, and then clear as breath beside my ear I heard it. "Emily." I didn't answer. I couldn't. It wasn't fear. It was weight. The voice was older, slower, but it was him. I remember. That was all. Then silence again, but not empty. I turned back toward the furnace. On the ground beside it was something new. A coin, red, plastic, the kind that used to come in cereal boxes. Jacob's, still warm. Later that day, Walt came back. I told him everything. Not just about the letter, but the voice, the room, the offer. He didn't doubt me. Didn't try to make sense of it either. He just looked at the coin in my hand and said, "We're not done." We brought 2 lanterns and a rope this time, a second crowbar, a portable heater just in case. The tunnel looked different now, wider. The air wasn't as tight, like it wanted us to come back. The chamber was the same, still lined with names, still quiet. But new shelf spaces had been carved into the walls. Blank still. But there, waiting. Walt stepped ahead of me and scanned the floor with his light. "Emily," he said. "Here." In the middle of the room, someone had placed something carefully into the dust. A pair of sneakers, child-sized. One of the laces tied in the same loose knot Jacob used to call a dragon loop. I crouched slowly, reached forward. They were still warm. Walt knelt beside me. "Look, bare footprints, leading deeper." We followed. The smaller tunnel curved twice and then opened into a second hollow. This one had only one thing inside. A door. Old. Wood. No frame. No knob. Just standing upright in the dirt. Carved into the center. Memory waits. I stepped closer. My hand hovered near the wood. It felt warm like sunlight through a window pane. Not hot. Not pulling. Just present. Walt didn't say anything. He stood back, gave me space. I touched it. It opened without sound, and beyond it light. Not bright, not harsh. A soft gold like early morning after snow. And inside, a room I knew. Jacob's. Recreated in exact detail. Down to the worn-out rug, the spaceship poster, the globe with the missing axis pin. He was sitting there, On the floor, cross-legged, barefoot, hair tousled like it always was after sleep. He turned, smiled, and somehow all I could do was sit. I don't know how long we were in there. The light didn't change. He didn't age. He looked like himself. But his eyes, they weren't a child's. "I read your letter," he said. "It helped?" I couldn't speak right away. My mouth was dry. He picked something up from beside him, held it out. "My old necklace, the one I buried in the yard after the police gave up. I kept this," he said. "It reminded me of you." I took it. My hands were shaking. "Why are you still here?" He looked down at the rug, then back at me. "The house didn't want to hurt anyone," he said. "It just wanted to remember." He paused. "It remembers what people forget. That's all it ever wanted, to hold things." "Can you come back?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not the way you hope. But you can let me go." The room around us began to shift. The poster peeled back slightly. The globe dimmed. "Tell them," he said. "Tell them who I was, not just how I disappeared. Tell them I was here." I reached out. My fingers barely touched his. The door behind me pulsed softly. The golden light turned pale. "I love you," I said. He smiled. "I know." And then he was gone. The room dissolved not in pieces but gently, like breath fading on a mirror. Walt caught me as I stepped backward into the tunnel. I was holding a photograph of Jacob, smiling, a photo I'd never seen before, not one the house had taken, one it had given back. We resealed the tunnel, not with bricks, not with stone, with a wooden frame, light plaster, enough to close it, not to trap it. The furnace didn't hum after that. It exhaled, and then stopped. 3 days after we sealed the tunnel, I called the county coroner's office, told them about the bones. I left out the tunnel, the heat, the photographs. I just said we'd found something sealed in the back wall of the basement. Children's remains. A box. Names scratched into stone. I used the word historic. Let them assume we meant old, maybe something left from the original construction. By the end of the week, a forensic team arrived with a small van and ground sonar. They didn't bring reporters. That helped. My mother stayed upstairs with the curtains drawn. Walt kept his distance, only checking in when I asked. I stood with one of the techs near the furnace room door. A woman in her 50s, steady hands, worn boots. She asked if we'd touched anything else. I told her just the first brick and the box. They found 3 more teeth, 2 molars, 1 canine, and fragments of fabric children's clothing brittle with age. The lead investigator, someone from out of state, said the chamber was too deliberate to be a coincidence. He called it an unauthorized burial space, said we weren't liable. The property had passed through 4 different owners since the Holbrooks, but when I gave him the journal, the one I'd kept hidden all these years, he stopped flipping pages and looked straight at me. "Where did you find this in the furnace room?" He closed it carefully. Some of these names match missing children's reports from the late 80s and early 90s, mostly unsolved cases. He didn't ask how I knew that. The next day, they excavated the space behind the second chamber, where the footprints had disappeared. They didn't find bodies, but they found personal items, tokens, dozens, labeled with initials. The team cataloged everything, then sealed the site with heavy plywood and concrete brackets. I asked what would happen to the room. The woman with the boots said they'd file it with the Historical Commission as under investigation. But unofficially, she said it would be marked as culturally significant, not for preservation, for silence. Walt and I waited until they were gone. Then we went back down. Just the 2 of us. The room was quiet. No hum, no warmth. But it didn't feel empty. He placed something on the edge of the concrete frame, a single brick we'd saved. The one Jacob had etched his name into. "What now?" I asked. He looked at the shelf. The air didn't shift. The walls didn't answer. "We don't owe it anything anymore," he said. I nodded. The sheriff's department released a public statement about the remains. Historical evidence found on private property linked to open cases. No foul play confirmed. Further investigation ongoing. They didn't use Jacob's name. So I did. I submitted a letter to the River Hollow Chronicle, told them about my brother, about what he was like, what he left behind. I didn't talk about the wall or the tunnel, just the boy who disappeared one summer evening and was never seen again. I included the photo the house had returned to me. They published it on the front page. The headline read, "Remember Jacob." Within a month, 5 more families came forward, each with stories that hadn't made it into police files. A brother who vanished in 1987. A cousin whose name was scratched into the stone. A neighbor who remembered strange heat near the old Kessler lot before the house was torn down. The sheriff reopened the Holbrook file. Quietly. No arrests were made. Too much time had passed. Too little physical evidence. But the department issued a formal acknowledgement of neglect of oversight. I read it out loud at the town hall meeting that spring. My hands didn't shake. My mother never spoke about the house again, but she left her knitting unfinished on the side table as if she meant to come back. She didn't. She moved in with a cousin in North Carolina and stopped answering letters. I didn't blame her. Some things once remembered become too heavy to carry. Walt kept the box, the one with the teeth. He said he didn't want it ending up in a storage drawer mislabeled or forgotten. He visits the new grave marker once a year. It's not in a cemetery, just a quiet patch of woods behind where the Holbrook home used to stand. No plaque, just a stone. It says, "We remember you." The house is quiet now. Not just in sound, but in presence. The furnace no longer clicks on in the middle of the night. The floorboards don't creak when no one's moving. It feels still, like whatever it was holding on to finally let go. Or maybe we did. I still live here, for now. People ask why. I don't always have a clear answer. Maybe because leaving would feel like erasing something. And Jacob was here. Not just lost here, but found here. If I left, I think I'd feel like I was putting him away again. The town moved on quickly. That's what small towns do. They whisper, they nod politely, then they return to routine. A few neighbors brought casseroles. One woman left a note that just said, "I remember him too." That meant more than she probably realized. Walt checks in most weekends. Sometimes we sit on the back porch and don't say much. Other times we talk about how we were different kids back then, how we missed things, how memory isn't always enough, but sometimes it's all you have. The grave marker behind the woods hasn't been touched. The stone hasn't shifted. The soil settled flat, undisturbed. I bring a candle there every now and then, just a small one. I don't say anything when I light it. I just wait a while, long enough for the wind to carry something away, or maybe bring something back. I haven't opened the plastered wall. I won't. Not again. Not because I'm afraid, but because some doors aren't for walking through twice. But I did add something to the wall just before sealing it for good. A single photograph. Not of Jacob. Of me. The one he kept. It's the only copy. I didn't make another. The house hasn't given anything back since, but I like to think it remembers that photo, and him, and maybe even me. My mother passed last winter. Peacefully, I'm told. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Her cousin mailed me a scarf she left behind, the same one she wore that night when she said the wall remembered. I keep it folded in a drawer. There's no plaque on the furnace room door, nothing that marks what happened here. But sometimes when the house settles and the evening light hits the basement just right, I think I can still see the edge of the old bricks behind the plaster. Like a memory trying to stay visible just for a moment longer. And I guess that's what this story became, not a haunting, not a warning, but a memory. A held one. I can't bring Jacob back. not the way I wanted. But I know now he wasn't erased. He was kept, not by malice, not by evil, just by something that didn't want to forget. And neither do I. If this story stayed with you, share it. Tell someone who needs reminding that even the quietest names matter, that even the forgotten deserve to be remembered, because sometimes the only justice we get is not being erased. And sometimes that's enough.